Everybody knows KZ, right? Especially if you are into the business of collecting IEMs like me. And I do believe that so many people started their IEM journey starting with KZ. And they are pretty much dominating the market for budget segment, especially quite affordable, as low as $3 and all the way to the more expensive one, which I will touch a bit more later. And talking about KZ, there's also CCA. Now, I don't think it is a secret anymore. If you are familiar into IEM, you would know that CCA is a sister company to KZ, just like Honda with Acura and Toyota with Lexus. So these two are pretty much from the same manufacturer, which is Knowledge Zenith. And talking about CCA and KZ, I have decided to do a combination review of these two IEM here, one of the latest offering from them, which is CCA Hydro and also this KZ ZS10 Pro2. The differences between these two, first and foremost, of course, the price. This is perhaps the most expensive CCA which I have seen yet in the last 3 years that I have known them. This is priced at around 100 to 110 US dollar, depending on which shop you're looking at. And this KZ ZS10 Pro 2 is anywhere between 30 US dollar. Okay. And the reason that I decided to do them together because they share many things in common, especially with the build itself. Okay, what's you're gonna find inside. So let's talk a bit more on what you're gonna find inside. So for this ZS10 Pro 2 and also Hydro, let me just show you. Okay, they are in my pocket, these two here. Okay, let's talk about the driver's configuration. These two came with the same setup of balanced armature from Knowles, which is 31736, okay, both of them, and they also have a dynamic driver configuration, which means that these two are hybrid. The differences, first and foremost, this Hydro, being the higher end model, offers 4 balanced armature and 2 dynamic driver. And in contrast, ZS10 Pro 2 is half of it. And when I say half of it, you're going to find only 2 balanced armature and a single dynamic driver. But pretty much the tuning itself is similar. And let's just have a closer look at the build and the construction. This KZ ZS10 Pro 2, being a typical KZ, the design is definitely KZ. Okay, one look at it and you know, without a doubt, this is a KZ. And I would say that it is pretty much as per expected for something which is priced at around 30 US dollar. The IEM itself actually built, looks, feel, okay, quite solid. Except that, of course, it comes with this stock KZ cable, which is pretty much a standard affair. If you have been buying KZ product, this is not a new thing. However, this CCA Hydro, being a premium model, which I believe is a flagship model for CCA up until now, and which also means that the flagship offering from Knowledge Zenith, from KZ in general, offers something which is a bit more luxurious for the price that you paid. Okay, first and foremost, the build quality itself. You can clearly see here in this photo, which I'm showing to you right now, that CCA Hydro offer a bit more of solid construction. It felt heavier too, and of course, to accommodate more drivers inside, it does look a bit bigger. And overall, I would say that definitely this is the most premium looking KZ which I have seen so far. Simple affair of this metal faceplate at the front here and hard resin at the back, and you can see the contents. And you would notice that on both of them, I am using KZ stock foam tips. I didn't even touch the silicone tips because they are just simply terrible, at least for me, for my own usage. Another similarity which both of them shared in common is that they both comes with these tunable dip switches. Yes, two of them. They are pretty much identical really, using the same construction of the dip switches, which offer 4 different kind of dip switches, which you can actually toggle with the use of something like a SIM ejector tool to tune the sound. And I will cover a bit more on that after this. By now, if you are already familiar with KZ or even CCA, then you would probably know the kind of house sound KZ offer or even CCA offer. Most of them, pretty much I would say that 90% built around V sound curve. But recently, in the last 1 year, you might have seen that KZ has been experimenting and offering different kind of tuning, especially something which is hovering towards being Harman-ish or even mild V sound curve, which hover very close to being neutral. So we are talking about IEM like ZVX, DFI, or even CCA, CRA, or even KZ Linglong. And I can guarantee you one thing, this CCA Hydro here, and even this ZS10 Pro2, pretty much the return of KZ house sound. In fact, I would even say that they showcase the prime example of KZ house sound. And what is KZ house sound? Just have a look here. Savor a moment, take a moment to savor the graph here. Pretty much what it says is that these two are very strong V sound curve, the kind of sound that you can expect from KZ, okay? Which means that there's a prominent suppression in the mid-range, but kind of like aggressive boosting in the upper frequency, especially in the upper mid-range, and of course the lower frequency, both the sub-bass and the mid-bass being strongly boosted, okay? But remember earlier, I did mention that these two came with these tuning switches, deep switches, pretty much again, similar to KZ DFI or even KZ Krila, okay? What you can do is that with these tuning switches, you can further tune the sound for different kind of flavoring. And I must admit that they are quite effective to a certain way that, you know, I was able to tune it to the kind of sound tuning which clicks closer to my taste. And I will just openly admit, this kind of strong V sound curve is not my preferred kind of sound because it appears a bit too colored. But let's just talk a bit more into that, okay? Let's start with this KZ ZS10 Pro 2, okay? I would just simply say that this KZ ZS10 Pro 2, especially if you tune, okay, everything to switch on, meaning that all 4 switches are switched on, what you're gonna get is something which is highly colored, dynamic, engaging, vibrant, and commanding. So which means that all the sound frequency are boosted, anywhere from lower frequency, mid-range to the upper frequency. But it is relatively still a strong V sound curve. And things get really interesting once you start to play with the switches. And I'm just gonna make it like this. Based on my taste and preference, and also you should be doing the same thing, okay? You should try to find out which setting works best for you. And in this case, for my own ZS10 Pro 2, I have already set my deep switches to all off from 1 to 3, and I only switch on switch number 4, which means that based on this setting here, turn on switch 4 means that high frequency reduced by 1 level. So I actually have opted to tame down a bit of the upper frequency and just simply let the rest of the sound frequency from mid-range to lower frequency to a point that I would consider as being untouched. I don't want this ZS10 Pro 2 to alter any of that sound frequency. So the result that I am getting is that something which is a bit more better balanced towards the way it presents the transient flow itself. The coloration is not so evident. It is still colored, but there's a bit more of transparency there and a bit more of taming of the upper frequency. And yes, did I mention that this thing is super energetic? The kind of energy that you can expect from most KZ IEM. But the good thing is that the way it presents the sound itself, it is non-offensive, especially if you use the kind of setting which is similar to mine, to tame a bit more on the upper frequency. And by turning off the switches from 1 to 2, it also tame a bit of the lower frequency. So, which means that it's kind of a bit flat for somebody who prefer energetic and vibrant sound. It is kind of a bit more, you know, the transient of the lower frequency kind of a bit fast but tidy, okay? But the mid-range itself would appear slightly frontal, because if I were to use some other setting, then I would say that because of that strong V sound curve, the mid-range does appear kind of a bit far away from my liking. I always prefer something which is a bit more mid-centric. So just remember that this is definitely not the kind of IEM for mid-centric people. Otherwise, when it comes to the quality of the 3 frequency range, which is the low, the mid-range, and the upper frequency, I would say that it is impressive that it has that kind of coherency for all the different drivers inside to work properly. So you can expect commanding, crisp, and pretty much well executed transient responses between different layer of sound frequency with different drivers. So you're gonna get energetic upper frequency, especially the mid-range and all the way to the treble decays. It does exhibit ample amount of macro and micro detail. And the lower frequency, it is definitely not boomy at all. Okay, it is definitely commanding, but not never boomy. It is clean, crisp, and does not exhibit any kind of something which I would consider as low quality. It is in fact the kind of sound which I would expect from a much more higher price IEM. Okay, and now let's just talk about this CCA Hydro. Just to make it simple, with everything that I have mentioned with this ZS10 Pro, this is a prime example of how the end state, okay, of a much better tuned, more refined execution of the same thing here. Not only it contains more driver as compared to this ZS10 Pro 2, it is also better tuned, okay? Better tuned in a way that instead of pushing up all the element of sound to a point that, there's always an idea, more is better, but in this case, more is not better. What it does is that it tones down certain sound frequency, especially in the upper frequency, and tone down a bit on the lower frequency to a point that it became transparent, to a point that it appears, sounding a bit more polished, a lot more polished if I were to compare it directly with this ZS10 Pro. So let me just put it this way. If you love the kind of sound which KZ offer, okay, this KZ ZS10 Pro is a prime example of that. It has that energy, punchiness, vibrancy, and fun factor, immersion factor. It is holographic and pretty much, fairly okay with the sound stage. But then CCA Hydro would bring that to the next level, more than next level. Okay, I am quite surprised when I listen to certain type of technical jazz or even classical music, which require a huge amount of accuracy. For example, like Diana Krall or even Vivaldi with this CCA Hydro, with the kind of tuning which I have here, let me just share with you. I opted to just turn off everything, okay, and just switch on switch number 3 and 4, which means that I am instructing my hydro to emphasize a bit more on upper mid-range all the way to the upper frequency. So it is kind of the opposite what I did here. So what I get in return is that something which is, no boosting in the lower frequency, just boosting in the mid-range, upper mid-range, all the way to the upper frequency, and I get something which hover close to being neutral. Yes, that is correct. And while doing that, okay, it has ample amount, good amount of analytical prowess, the ability to resolve macro and micro detail really well, I would say, and the kind of, micro detail which I would expect at even more expensive IEM. And while doing that, the good thing about it is it never appears sharp sounding. Okay, it does not emphasize the detail in a way that it would even feel like as if it is being, aggressive or even edgy sounding. And it also depends on what kind of partner you attach them to. For example, I haven't touched about the power itself. One thing that I can tell you, both of these runs better on low gain rather than high gain. So which means that, they do not need that much power to sound good at all. I was able to use it already properly with my phone here, which is Sony Xperia 1 Mark IV. Okay, and I spent quite a lot of time using my favorite DAP now, which is iBasso DX180. And I also spent quite a lot of time using this 3.5mm single-ended of Onyx Alpha. Okay, and to simplify, to put it this way, I have found that both of them sounded better, in fact, when run on low gain. Because if you push too much power into them, they have a tendency to sound kind of a bit shouty, okay, kind of a bit, let's say, edgy. But putting less power, but with the right kind of, good source, running low gain on this DX180 especially, I get the kind of sound which is definitely suggests that it is pricier than the price of these two IEM. So that is definitely a good thing. The tuning is definitely more mature on this CCA Hydro. With the competition getting fiercer and fiercer day by day, right, Geoff? Say hello to everyone. We are getting so many options, so many competition from anywhere to $5 to 3,000, 3,005, or even more than that. But one thing which is true, what I have observed so far, that price no longer determine quality. Okay, let's just be very clear on this. KZ has received quite a lot of, should I say, critiques over the last few years because of whatever reason it is, and I will not dig too much into it because that is not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is that to showcase what these two can offer, and let's just talk about how does it compare against the rest of the competition in the market. In order to put things into perspective, if you check the link of my audio IEM ranking in the description below, you would find that there's over 178 IEM, which I have listed there. And the score for these two are definitely something which I would consider as impressive. First and foremost, with all the qualities which I have already mentioned earlier, this ZS10 Pro2 is definitely among some of the best in the mid-table section area, alongside something like KZ own PR2 or even some other IM, which you can see there, okay? But the most impressive thing would be from this CCA Hydro here, okay? With the price of just 100 to 110 US dollar, without a doubt, with the kind of quality and sound, which I have shown to you on the spreadsheet there, scoring at 65 out of 100, this is definitely the kind of IM that rub shoulder with the likes of SIMGOT EM10, which I have just reviewed recently. Just take a moment to have a look there, but the whole idea behind it is that I must admit, objectively, KZ and CCA have done a great job with this CCA Hydro.